Good morning. Welcome to today's presentation, Making Room, Soul Deep Satisfaction Through Simple Living. My name is Mark Mann. I'm the Director of Programs and Institutes here at the Catholic Incarnation Center. The ministry of the center offers opportunities for those who are already Catholic to explore and have a deeper awareness of our Catholic faith. We also invite seekers from other faith traditions or no faith tradition at all to discover and dialogue with us about this way of life. We're a ministry of the Paulist Fathers at service to the Diocese of Grand Rapids. I'm very happy to welcome Kyle Kramer here as our presenter today. Before I formally introduce Kyle, I want to offer this reminder that the programs here at the Information Center are free and open to the public. We are donation-based and rely on the contributions of our friends and associates. And so very grateful for your contribution towards today's presentation. Your support and encouragement is indispensable. Thank you. You can also connect with us by signing up for our free newsletter we send out on Thursdays. Watch our videos on our YouTube channel, including this presentation today, and follow us on social media. Your help is a big help. Your support is a big help to everything that we do here. And of course, you're welcome to visit us here at the center. We have beautiful artwork hanging here through the rest of Lent until Easter by Teresa Bravata, and we have ongoing programs as well. But also the coffee's always on. So, and Kyle, you're always welcome to come up and visit. We can trade notes, talk shop there from the Passionist Fathers Earth and Spirituality Center. Let's continue with opening prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord our God, when your love spilled over into creation, you thought of us. We are from love, of love, and we are made for love. Let our hearts, O God, always recognize, cherish, and enjoy your goodness in all of creation. Direct all that we are toward your praise. Teach us reverence for every person and all things, and energize us in your service. Lord our God, may nothing ever distract us from your love, neither health nor sickness, wealth nor poverty, long life nor short life, honor or dishonor. May we never seek nor choose to be other than you intend or wish. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus the Lord. Amen. Amen. Kyle Kramer is the Executive Director of the Passionist Fathers Earth and Spirit Center, which offers interfaith educational programming in meditation, ecology, and social compassion. He is the former Director of Graduate Theology Programs and Spiritual Formation for St. Meinrad, a Benedictine monastery, and Roman Catholic School of Theology in southern Indiana. Kyle and his family spent 15 years as organic farmers in Spencer County, Indiana, and also building a net positive green home. Kyle serves as a Catholic Climate Ambassador for the Catholic Climate Covenant and is author of A Time to Plant, Life Lessons in Work, Prayer, and Dirt from Ave Maria Press, and Making Room, Soul Deep Satisfaction Through Simplicity from Franciscan Media. He is a former columnist and essayist for America Magazine, currently writing for St. Anthony Messenger Magazine, and the host of the Earth and Spirit podcast. He speaks across the country about the intersection of ecology, community, and contemplative spirituality. Please help me welcome Mr. Kyle Kramer.
Hey, everybody. It is great to be with you. Yes, we're on Zoom. I think we're all used to this by now. On the downside, we don't get to be in the same room together. At least y'all do. I guess on the upside, I'm not exhausted after a poor night's sleep and a 8-hour drive to Michigan. So you've got me at my freshest. But Mark, I want to thank you and everyone you've gathered for your good work with the Paulist Fathers. I loved, I won't have the quote exactly, but I loved how in your opening prayer, you talked about how we're from love, we're of love, we're made for love. And I think if I were to summarize everything that I'd like to share today, you've already got it. This is going to be a workshop all about simplicity, but really it's about intentionality, but really it's about love and how we manifest love in the best ways that we can in our own lives and in how our lives intersect with others. Mark mentioned that I run the Passionist Earth and Spirit Center. Just a little bit about that to give you some context for my current work. We were founded by a Catholic religious order. I realize when I hear my own introduction read that I basically have spent my whole adult career working with vowed religious Catholic communities, whether it's the Benedictines or writing for the Jesuits in America or the Franciscans at St. Anthony Messenger, and now the Passionists, who were founded by St. Paul of the Cross in Italy several centuries ago, with a particular mission to be present to the suffering of the world, the suffering humans and the suffering non-humans as well, in memory of and solidarity with the crucifixion of Jesus. So as Mark said, this is founded by, the center is founded by the Passionists, but it is an interfaith spirituality center. So we have a special affection for contemplative practices like mindfulness meditation. In fact, we've become the largest provider of mindfulness meditation tools and instruction in the entire central US. So that's a lot of our work, training thousands and thousands of students every year to adopt mindfulness tools in their life, and really to bring mindfulness to all of the daily actions and choices that they make. So you'll probably hear me mention the word mindfulness, or at least attentiveness, or certainly intentionality as we go through this workshop today. And I won't stop to give you a primer on mindfulness, but well, maybe I will. Okay. If I were to give you just one sentence, it would be paying attention to your present moment experience with curiosity and kindness, and then choosing your actions out of that attentiveness. And you'll see, I hope, as we walk through this workshop, that everything we're going to talk about is bringing mindful attention and intentionality to our life choices. So Mark mentioned my latest book. I have it right here, of course, because an author never goes anywhere without a stack of books in his trunk or her trunk or near at hand. I am essentially, what we're going to try and do today is stuff the first, I don't know, half or third or so of this book into one workshop. So if you're intrigued by what you engage here, or you want to engage it more deeply, would encourage you to pick this book up. It's available wherever you get books. Hopefully it's a local bookseller. And I think the way I'd like to jump in is Mark framed this for me as a part of a series that is aimed at older folks. And I consider older anything from 50 plus, I guess. I'm not quite there. I'm 48, almost 49. So I don't pretend to have the wisdom and the life experience that many of you in this room and on this call have. And I don't see myself as dispensing wisdom in any form or fashion. I think that would be arrogant on a good day, but certainly not amongst my elder peers here. What I do see myself as is a midwife. I hope, honestly, that I don't actually say much today that doesn't just sound like common sense to you that you probably have thought of before or heard before. What I hope to do is help you discover and birth the wisdom that's within you and that's appropriate to your own personality, your history, your circumstances. And so I'm not going to deliver this ready-made presentation to you in a box with a bow. What I'm hoping is that I can give you some invitations to tussle with some things that you may, as I said, already know or be skirting around, and to come to your own insights and in this community together that we're going to form for the next 90 minutes. So I think the way I want to dive in here, and I'll share screen soon, and Mark, you and I can talk about whether I should just be this little talking head in a tiny box with a big PowerPoint, or if we should kind of divvy that up. But I want to talk about time, and time as a precious resource. I know the title of this talk was Making Room, Soul Deep Satisfaction Through Simple Living. And yes, that's true. And we'll jump into all those things. But ultimately, any kind of life commitment to simplicity is about how you steward the precious and non-renewable resource of time. especially as we grow older. My nest is starting to empty, so my kids are going off to college, and just the time that I know I have left with them in the house, I can feel it shrinking. And I just, as I myself am, well into midlife, I know how fast time is running, and I'm sure you guys can relate to that as well. So this workshop's all about how do we steward our time well? How do we bring intentionality to daily living? Because to me, that is what any well-lived spiritual life is about. It's certainly what Christian discipleship is about, intentionally living the gospel through our daily choices. And our choices happen in the context of our time. How do we devote our time and our energy? And I'm not talking here about, when I say like making the best use of our time, I don't mean like a productivity hack or how to be most efficient and productive. Although I suppose I have a kind of a side interest in those, actually a pretty strong interest, but really not being productive, just knowing that at the end of a day, at the end of a life, we spent our time well. And we lived in this path of love that Mark laid out so wonderfully in our opening prayer. Okay, Mark, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and let's see. Okay, can everybody see my presentation? If anyone, it's hard for me to see you all are in a little box on my screen now. Can someone raise their hand in the back if you can see it? Okay, good, thank you. Excellent. We're 2 years into this Zoom world, but we're still figuring it out. Every context is different.
Kyle, I've got it set up so that it's side by side.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that is great, because honestly, I hate seeing myself on a screen, but if I know you guys can see me and see my presentation, I'll just leave it like this until you tell me otherwise. Okay, now I got to figure out how to advance my slides. There they are. Okay, this is what I hope we can accomplish in the next, got to get my watch out here. Okay, in the next 75 minutes or so. So I've touched several times on the word simplicity, but I do want to kind of dig down into my working definition of that. And then for the remainder of our time, I want to explore with you all 4 main motivating factors why I think it makes sense to make some conscious commitments to simplicity or simple living. And those are, in brief, in case someone gets off this call early, first of all, because it's just a pleasurable way to live. There's, as the subtitle of this talk indicates, there's a soul deep satisfaction to making conscious choices about how complicated or simple our lives are. Secondly, because simplicity in its varied forms resonates with spiritual authenticity and growth. I wouldn't entirely equate the two, but I think that simplicity is a path of spiritual growth. And we can talk about why that is. And thirdly, because simplicity helps us connect in meaningful ways with those who are poor. That's certainly true here at the Earth and Spirit Center. That's where I am right now. I'm looking out the window this way to this wonderful old Passionist monastery where the priests and brothers live, and with their charism of connecting deeply with the passion of Jesus and therefore the suffering of the world. And we all know that it's the people who are poor, the people who are on the margins, who almost always suffer most, or at least suffer more than their fair share. And finally, because simplicity helps us connect deeply with our home, the earth, our home that we belong to in every fiber of our being, that we are not fundamentally separate from. In fact, that's one of the main tenets of mindfulness teaching in our context, is we help to dissolve this line that we draw between our own selves and the rest of the world, whether that's other people or the natural world itself, because we are also the natural world, and the walls we build are artificial ultimately. So those are the 4 reasons that I'm going to get into in this talk. And we'll stop along the way. I'm not entirely familiar with how other meetings of yours go. So I'm going to try and sprinkle in opportunities for both large group conversation back and forth with me, smaller breakouts with amongst yourselves, and everything in between. But this will definitely be interactive. And Mark, I'm going to trust you to like swing the camera around to yourself and like give me the throat cut sign if I'm going too long or we need a break to interact, because that's one thing I really miss on Zoom is the body language and being able to be there with you and you know get a boredom meter reading. But hopefully we'll keep this lively. Okay. I am going to quote my own book here because that's what authors do, and present this working definition for me and for this workshop about what simplicity is. And we'll talk a lot about what simplicity isn't as well. But it's making intentional lifestyle choices that create the freedom we need to honor the deepest needs of ourselves and the wider concentric circles of all of our human relationships and the entire natural world of which we're a part. So we have ourselves as individuals, blurred line with ourselves embedded in communities, blurred line with our communities and ourselves embedded within the entire natural world. So I want to kind of dig into this definition in a variety of ways. First of all, and I never preview my slides here. Okay, so I never know exactly what slide is coming up next. Simplicity really has to do with both interior attitudes and exterior decisions. So the interior attitudes is how we orient ourselves toward a life that is more at ease and more satisfying and more connected with things that are important and more connected with things in general. And it's also an exterior decision. So it's these interior attitudes and commitments driving exterior choices that are real and that are important and that actually contribute in a substantial way to our own well-being, to the health of our communities, to the health of our planet. So I'm going to walk through this definition, sort of highlighting some phrases along the way and giving you a little color there. So when I say intentional lifestyle choices, this interior work of intentionality, this is first and foremost about choosing. This is about choosing the virtues and values that are going to contribute to a life that we're happy with and proud of. These can be values that were given, say, by the Catechism of the Church, that we adopt from our traditions. These can be values that we discern and strengthen throughout our lives. But the point is that we're not just getting along and going along. We're not just letting ourselves be swept along with the currents of culture and social media and everything like this. And what this ultimately means is freedom. This, and to get a little philosophical here, this is both negative freedom, which is the freedom from things, freedom from addiction, freedom from interference by others. We Americans tend to be really big on negative freedom, like don't tread on me. But to my mind, and I think in the Catholic tradition and in most spiritual traditions, true freedom is actually all about positive freedom. It's freedom for. It's freedom for service. It's freedom for growth. It's freedom for our fullest flourishing as individuals and communities and a planet. So we're making intentional lifestyle choices that honor our values, that create the freedom we need to honor ourselves, our deepest needs. And when I say our deepest needs, I want to get to that first bullet point again, which we'll get to in more depth in just a sec. But what are the things that make us truly happy and give us true joy? And what kind of life serves those needs? And I would say we know, all of us, each of us knows deep in our heart what things make that heart sing. And I'm sure we know that it's probably not just getting the latest automobile or the biggest house or getting X number of views or likes or anything like that. We know the things that are our deepest, that touch our deepest needs and lead to our deepest satisfactions. Simplicity honors these wider concentric circles of human relationships, our communities. We are social creatures. I've thought so much about this lately as we're stuck in this, we have been stuck in this electronic world these last 2 years, how damaging that has been, how hard that has been, because we are just hardwired for social connection. We need each other for survival and flourishing. We can't live on Zoom forever, and thank goodness we're getting out of this. So we want to ask in this workshop, what kind of lifestyle choices towards simplicity can serve our communities? Or put another way, how can choices that simplify our lives in various ways serve our communities as well? Because they can. And then finally, our relationship with the natural world. What kind of life deepens our relationship in a meaningful way to the rest of the natural world? Which, let's just face it, many of us, myself included, first on the list, for many of us, the natural world is an afterthought most of our days. If we're evil, greedy capitalists, then it's just a strip mine and a sewer, as Joanna Macy says, just a resource pit for our raw materials. But what does it look like to connect in a way where we really can, who is it? William Blake says, we can see the angels perching in the treetops. We can listen truly to the voice of the natural world, which, let's face it, it is speaking more and more loudly these days, and in language that's less and less easy to deny. So I'm all about a philosophical term, actually, which has been adopted in the Catholic tradition in various ways, but it's called eudaimonia, or eudaimonia, however you want to pronounce it. It is, originally, I think it stems from Aristotle and his school, but it's about the good life. What makes for a good, flourishing life that contributes to the well-being of the whole? Okay, so I'm going to pause for a minute here, because again, we want to keep this interactive. And I want to, Mark, if you can help me here, if there are any questions about this particular definition, if you need something clarified, or if you want to make a quick comment about this, I'd like us to at least be on the same page before I dive into the rest of this talk. So can we take just a few minutes to make sure we're all on the same page?
Sure. Anybody here in the room? I can bring the cameras.
And be warned, if you don't ask a question of me, I'm going to ask one of you.
Holly or Joanne? Whether of you have any comments or insights, thumbs up from Holly.
All right. Okay, well then as I said, I'm going to ask you a question. Does this resonate? I mean, I'm not asking if you understand it. Clearly you understand it, but do these categories of well-being make sense? The individual, the social, the natural world. Hey, there's a newcomer, Amy.
There we go. Hi, Amy. Hi, Michael. Welcome.
We've been having internet problems. It completely shut down. I had to reboot.
Oh.
Well, I'm glad you could join us. We just got through doing a little bit of introductions, and Kyle's opened the floor for talking about the definition that you see on the screen, the definition of simplicity. So people are going to be speaking about what part of this definition resonates with them. So welcome again.
When you run a meditation center, you learn to not be afraid of silence.
No, I could say that your definition makes sense. I appreciated the distinction of freedom from and freedom to. I like that.
Excellent. All right. Well, and hey, Mark, just a logistical note. For my part, I can hear everybody pretty well. So if it's easier for you to just like point the camera, I think that'll still work if you don't want to be traipsing around the room all the time. But if you want to traipse around the room all the time, hey.
I'm happy to do that, Kyle.
I try to like get up every 20 minutes. Actually, I have a standing desk, a treadmill desk. So if I am sitting, I try to get up on a regular basis, which of course I can't do right now. But you can, Mark. So maybe that's why you want to get up and follow people around with this camera. Okay, I am going to ask much more specific questions later of you as a plenary and of you as a small group. But I also need to take my watch off here to make sure, because I have, when my thing went full screen, I lost my timekeeper. So there we go. I have like a real old-fashioned analog watch. Because of course I'm committed to simplicity. Hey, you know what? I should be the first to say, not only am I probably younger than most of you, and so don't purport to bring great wisdom, but also I am, even though I've made a lot of really conscious commitments to simple living. I mean, Mark didn't say this, but when we were living for 15 years on the organic farm, the first year, this was before I got married and had kids, but the first year I lived with no electricity, no heat, no running water, no plumbing. I basically camped for a year because I was that committed to simplicity. So I have been on various parts of the spectrum, but now I'm like this comfy middle-aged guy who's trying to figure out how to put his kids through college and, has a regular salary and, a mortgage and all of this stuff. So I say that to say, yes, I'm deeply committed to this and have really dived in. But on the other hand, I'm the first among hypocrites. So I want to recognize that all of us are works in progress here. Any progress is good from where you were to where you might be. And I'm on that journey too. So I don't pretend to have any of this stuff mastered, even though I've written books and tried to live it deeply. So I'm going to learn from this as well. Okay. I want to dive into that first of 4 reasons why it might make sense to adopt simplicity and intentionality in your life. And the simple answer is because it's just more fun. It is just more deeply pleasurable to live in a way that you're not constantly frazzled and pulled and conflicted. In fact, this year, I've run the Earth and Spirit Center for about 8 years, and it's a small nonprofit. And we're always, my joke has always been, don't look behind the curtain of a meditation center, because then you'll see everybody scurrying around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to pedal hard and make the whole thing work. And I mean, it's kind of a funny joke, but it's become less and less funny for me because I don't want that frazzle in my life. And in fact, this year, one of my New Year's resolutions was that I am going to start acting like I run a meditation center, meaning that I'm going to try to really live and embody, in my work life especially, what it means to be centered and sane, because not only is that more effective, but it's just more fun. And okay, so these 2 questions, like what do happiness and fulfillment mean for us in regards to simplicity, and how do we get there? I'm going to give you a couple examples that have worked for me, and I hope that you can see yourself in these and that they resonate with you in some form or fashion. I think even despite what I said earlier about this great divide we've created between us and the natural world, we are creatures of earth. And I would wager to say that probably almost all of us on this call have had some profound, meaningful, revelatory, spiritual experience in the natural world. I know that I have. I can name the trees that have been my conversation partner. I hiked parts of the Appalachian Trail, and I'm a rock climber actually. And so I have these regular encounters in a really kind of extreme way on a cliffside, sometimes hundreds of feet up. But connection in nature can pare everything back to its essentials. And it is a place where we can find ourselves and we can find God revealed. Another place that is so important to live out a life of satisfaction and fulfillment is in our relationships. For me, that has looked especially like marriage and parenting. Just like a couple of weeks ago, I was with my 15-year-old son, Eli. And Eli is totally a teenage boy right now. Like, dad is a total geek. And, this is what I get from Eli a lot. And yet we had this magical day together where we did some rock climbing and we played this video game that he loves and I hate, but we did it together. And it was one of those times when you realize how fast the clock runs, how fast the sand is coming through the hourglass. And just the whole day of being outside together and working on firewood was just magical. That being said, we've had a lot of times of tussling too, as my wife and I have had, as I'm sure you all have had in your relationships too. But the point is that even despite or because of all those challenges of our relationships at work and at home, there are few things more meaningful and satisfying than really investing in your relationship. And I'm going to put forth that a life of simplicity enables you to show up for those relationships in a much more profound and present way. Another thing that can be the stage or the locus or even the cause of simple pleasures is doing good work. I am a huge fan. I'm not good at multitasking. I would say that none of us are. And we may fool ourselves. But for me, one of the profoundest pleasures, whether it's in my knowledge work at my job or in woodworking, and other hobbies that I have, and work that I've done on the farm and elsewhere, the ability to do focused, distraction-free, either cognitively or physically demanding work is so crucial right now. And so I think it's like an endangered species where our attention spans are being more and more degraded by our social media feeds, our news feeds. And I know I'm going to sound like a curmudgeon here. That's because I am one. I have deep suspicions of a lot of our current attention economy, and I make no bones about it. I am personally not on social media. Well, I think I have a Facebook page because my publishers have demanded that I do, but I don't think I've updated it for about 10 years or so, maybe 8 years since I came to the Earth and Spirit Center. But I got actually there's a whole chapter in this book about the digital world. But the point here is we have to find ways. It is so deeply pleasurable to find ways to work in a focused way, to be in a flow state, as the psychologist, oh man, can I pronounce this? No, I can't. I can't do it. It's not in my notes, but this amazing Hungarian psychologist who coined the word flow state. We know that that's pleasurable when time melts away for us in our work, in our avocations. Now, what's interesting here is what I think is interesting is I thought through this, and this corresponds to some chapters in my book, as I say, but it's interesting what simplicity or the pleasures that I'm talking about, the deep life satisfactions, don't necessarily require. And even though I'm a faithful Catholic and have been for a long, long time, even though I run a center that's founded in the Catholic tradition and I've been in that world, I don't necessarily think that formal religion is the panacea. I don't think it automatically guarantees a deeply satisfying and simple life. I think it can, and I think it should. I think it also can be misused. And so we can't simply go to our religion, our religious traditions, our institutions, and expect that they're going to give us the easy formula. And if we simply go to mass and say our novenas, that everything's going to be fine. Because I married into a huge Catholic family, my wife and her many, many siblings, and many of them are beautiful people, but they also struggle even in their deep faithfulness. And so it's not necessarily an easy go-to, but it's an important part of the puzzle. Simple pleasures also don't need to be high tech. It does not take being constantly connected to your social media, to the news, to your email, whatever, to be happy. I would actually argue the opposite. Rarely do we get to the end of our life and think, oh my God, it was so fantastic that I had all this time invested in doom scrolling on my phone. That's just not how our pleasure centers are wired. We still have 150,000-year-old brains. They are not evolved to get deep pleasure out of technology, despite the dopamine hits and everything else that technology is providing for us. That's not deep pleasure. It also doesn't take much money. I don't want to say the best things in life are free, although that may be true. Yeah, I think that's probably true. But you need enough money to get on the decent rung on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you are scraping by and food insecure, housing insecure, and so forth, there's no fun in that. There's no romanticizing that. But beyond a certain point, and I can't remember the stats here, but I think it's like $70,000 household income a year. Beyond that, the incremental difference of happiness is basically negligible. And I think maybe even starts to turn negative at some point. So you don't need a lot of money. And this is an important one for me. We don't get our deepest pleasures by accomplishing goals and being recognized for them. This is hard for me because I'm hardwired that way. I'm super type A, I had a hard charging healthcare CEO father who modeled 100-hour work weeks for me. And of course looks at me now and said, what, you run a little nonprofit? What happened to my son? But we know that at the end of our life, the CV is not, actually, that reminds me, David Brooks has this great book, I think it's called The Second Mountain. I've read it recently, where he talks about, resume values versus eulogy values, I think is his distinction. And the resume values are the things that you've accomplished, the things you're proud of, but the eulogy values are the ones that people talk about at your funeral. And those rarely have to do with all the trophies and awards. As I said, I hope all of this makes perfect sense to you. I hope that you are so deeply in these realizations that this just affirms where you are. So if it doesn't, if the simple pleasures of intentional choices in life don't necessarily require or entail all these things, they do require time and attention. You can't do this by simply being distracted and bouncing through your life like a pinball. They require deliberation or deliberateness, deliberate practice, which is how you really get good at something, and the cultivation of a skill, whether that's, my wife's, she's an artist and a beautiful household CEO, homemaker, and one of her deep, soul deep skills is creating amazing meals, and she's become a fantastic chef over our 20 years together. We can't be happy without these connections I mentioned earlier, to our deepest innermost self, to others, to the natural world. It's almost impossible to be happy unless we find a way to be of service to others. Maybe that's like just to our kids, to our spouse, our partner. Maybe it is on the broader stage. Maybe we volunteer at a soup kitchen. Maybe we run a huge company that I don't know, solves malaria or something like this. And ultimately, we have to be on the path of self-transcendence. I run a contemplative practice center, and one of the key insights about contemplative prayer and meditation is that you learn to relativize your own ego's concerns and recognize that that's part of your personality, but it's not the deepest part. And when we really get deep, we are less concerned with ourselves. We're more concerned with, as Mark said earlier, with how love manifests in the world and how we can be a conduit for that love. Okay, I want to, after each of these 4 sections, I want to take a break, and I'll at least stretch my legs under the table here, kicking my camera, I see. And I think, Mark, what we should do is create one breakout room for Holly, Joanne, and Amy, and then have y'all who are in person, if you could just turn to your neighbor, so we can just go by twos, and if there's an odd number, just have a group of 3. And I want you to describe to your partner or partners a time when you deliberately chose an activity that made you feel fully alive, and what was in it and what wasn't in it. And then when we reconvene in 5 minutes. If you can set that timer, Mark, then we'll do some group sharing for a few minutes before we move on. Okay, so Mark, I'm going to let you do the facilitation from here.
Yep, so I'm opening all the rooms, so Amy and Holly, you're welcome to join and turn on your cameras and be able to have a conversation. And I'll type up the question and drop that in the chat so that you can see that. And everyone else is welcome to, as Kyle had shared, turn to your neighbor and talk for 5 minutes on a time when deliberately.
I like this.
About 30 seconds.
All right, everyone. It is hard to corral a group from Zoom.
Right, can we reconvene, please?
Mark's gonna be the tough guy here.
Yeah, I'm doing it.
All right. Well, so I would love to hear from any brave souls. Was there something that we don't have time for everybody to report out, obviously, but I'd love to hear if there was some just amazing thing that was shared that you think the entire group would benefit from. Does anyone want to offer that up?
Never got too busy.
So the question was, could you repeat the question again, Kyle?
Yeah, was there anything that came up in your groups that you feel was so powerful that you feel it's worth sharing with the entire gathering? And just jump in.
I think what we're seeing is that what we said in our group is that we didn't really deliberately choose things, but things did happen. Like Terry went to a restaurant that she goes to a lot, and the waitress come up and asked her a question because she goes to that restaurant and that's become kind of a family to her.
Okay.
So it was kind of, an accidental thing.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think accidental in that she didn't like manufacture that experience. But you raise a really important point there, which is that she did make choices and have intentionality about frequenting that place. And so kind of like the life of prayer or meditation, you can't manufacture any given spiritual experience. You can't like pre-schedule the lightning bolts, but you can put yourself in a place where those kind of encounters can happen. You can have intentionality of showing up. So I think there's actually this great parallel between showing up at the restaurant consistently so that you come to be known and to know, and therefore can build that kind of relationship. There's a parallel between that and any kind of good, consistent spiritual practice. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to share a similar kind of experience that was powerful?
I was gonna say, I went, this past Sunday, I went to 40 Days for Life, and I was just on the corner and this young woman pulled up and said, "Are you protesting? What are you protesting for?" And I said, "No, I'm not protesting, I'm praying." And we had a very interesting conversation. I guess she stayed there for about 15 minutes. I talked to her about, what we're praying for and what the whole thing was about, and that we're praying for people who get abortions, that having abortion isn't easy, and we're praying for those people as well as praying for the babies, and just it gave her a whole different outlook of what we were actually doing there. So hopefully I put a little bug in her head, I guess, to make her think about things rather than we're out there protesting.
Right.
It was a really good experience.
Excellent. Well, and what I'm hearing in both of these examples, I'm hearing several threads. First of all, that these are direct encounters. These are not social media mediated or anything like that. These are real encounters with real people in real time and real space. They have to do with deeply held, I'm not sure about restaurant going per se, but like habits and convictions, we would say. So you, I don't know your name, who spoke last, but who are attending the protest/prayer, you're bringing your own values and intentionality to that, and creating relationships in the midst of it. And what I would say about the first speaker is that food, oh my gosh, I wrote an entire chapter about food in this book. Because I just love food, but also because that is one of the most powerful and pleasurable experiences of connection and satisfaction. And it's a place where simplicity has so much relevance, because you vote every day, every meal with the world that you want. with your fork. I don't think I said that right. So you vote with your fork every day for the kind of world you want and the kind of relationships you want. I'm so glad someone brought up food. All right, I'm going to move on to the second of 4 pieces of this workshop. At least I hope I am. There we go. This is a good and hard truth about the spiritual life. And that is that while growth and flourishing are good and necessary, we love it in the springtime when the world wakes back up. I loved it when our tiny little twin daughters, who were just like peanuts when they were born, grew and grew. But we also know that there are limits to growth, that boundaries and limits are necessary. And if I would wager to say that everyone on this call has experienced some kind of loss or diminishment, whether that's someone we loved, whether that's some personal illness or injury. We know that you don't get through this life unscathed, and that the spirituality, any kind of spirituality that doesn't take that seriously is a shallow spirituality. It's not true. It's not authentic. In fact, I want to read a quote here from my book, which I think says it better because I wordsmithed it than I can probably say extemporaneously. But I wrote, authentic spirituality requires that we allow ourselves to be transformed, to have our entire being opened to a world far larger than the confines of our own ego, such that we appreciate the sometimes terrible and frightening beauty of that larger world. We recognize our belonging in it, and we make moral commitments to serve this larger life of which we're a part. The great spiritual masters seem to agree that this process of transformation is almost never a process of addition. It almost always entails losing or letting go of things. It's really interesting to unpack that a bit. It's interesting to run a spirituality center where we have all kinds of wise guru figure type folks teach and provide workshops. And there's a temptation for those of us who are in the business of spiritual growth, or those of us who aren't in the business, but just have those deep commitments in our life. There's a temptation to think that you become wise by adding things, by adding doctrines, by adding facts or practices, by reading enough, by going to enough retreats, etc. And ultimately, that is not true. Not that those things aren't helpful, they are. But at the end of the day, the deepest forms of prayer are ones where almost all of that falls away. My wife, Cindy, who is an artist and just a hardwired contemplative in the way that I'm not. It's not a native language to me. I've learned it as an immigrant. But she gives me a hard time because I'm a voracious reader and I love to listen to podcasts and just learn all the time. And she says, you can't just keep building that up and expect that that is your spiritual life. And recognizing that letting go aspect of spirituality, recognizing that is important, that takes humility. And this doesn't just function in the spiritual realm. It functions in the intellectual realm, functions in the personal realm. In the Buddhist tradition, they call that beginner's mind, where you come to a situation, whatever it is, and you don't assume that you know it all. You don't assume I've been here before, I've been around the block, let me dispense my wisdom. You approach each situation as if you were a kindergartner, as if you were just learning. And there's a deep humility about that. And what it does is it keeps your spiritual lens from fogging up. It keeps you clear-sighted so that you can see the real truths in your life and not be distracted. Because it's not like stuff is bad, material things, whatever else. It's not bad per se. It can be a hindrance to the point or to the extent that it gets in the way of authentic spirituality because it's just putting fog on your windshield, because you're so distracted by, I don't know, maintaining the second home or having the latest wardrobe or whatever. I mean, those are kind of cliched things, but all of the different things that we attend to when, as you know from Mary and Martha, when there's one thing needful. So there's a humility implied in an authentic spiritual path that has to do with letting go. I'm way ahead of my slides here. Oops. And I think that's all of them. There we go. Yeah. So I want to ask a few questions. Oh, let's just wrap this section up. The beautiful thing about simplicity is that it resonates with these deep spiritual truths. Simplicity recognizes that you don't win the game of life by adding as much stuff as possible to your life, just as you don't become spiritually wise simply by adding one aphorism onto the next. And it's not only a spiritual truth, but it's also an ecological truth. And I said that earlier, that our very ecosystems are hardwired for growth and letting go, diminishment, decay. Our bodies are wired that way. This is how the creation works. This is what God intends for this world, that there are these cycles and seasonality in terms of growth and letting go. And I'm sure you all know someone, or you have been someone, I have been someone who has held on too tightly to maybe a relationship longer than they should have, to their own child when their child needed freedom, to security, to all of the things that when we grasp on tightly, we can on some level feel our soul shutting down. And the simple path, the commitment to a simple path, whether that's in your food choices or how you deal with your consumer items or your work life, your life with money, all these subsequent chapters in the book, the second half of my book, all of those serve this fundamental truth that simplicity and the satisfaction and the spiritual growth that it entails are about letting go and being willing to do that. So I would love for us to just have an informal session here, and we won't break into small groups, but I'd love anyone to just toss out a thought. Hopefully, Mark, you can corral an introvert into doing this as well. But can anyone share an experience that you think would be helpful for the group when either you held on to something too tightly, and that might have, that got in the way of living your fullest, best life, or when you did, with intentionality, let go of something, whether as I show in the slide here, it's something you owned, a relationship you were in, a certain expectation. How and why did you let go, and what happened, and how did you change in that process? So and if you want to jump in at that third question, if that's what moves you, an experience with the spirituality of subtraction, as they call it. I think that's an Eckhart Tolle, not Eckhart Tolle, excuse me, Meister Eckhart coined this idea of the spirituality of subtraction. But I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts here. I'll keep the floor open, and Mark, I'll trust you to point the camera where it needs to point, or to unmute folks if they want to speak from Zoom.
Joe, thanks.
Sure. We're an older group, and I don't know if it's for every one of us, but most of us have downsized.
Mm.
Well, downsizing is really hard to do. And,
Yes.
and as older people, we'll probably have to downsize more than once. So it's not like you get rid of stuff, but this stuff, well, that's gonna go too. And eventually you get down to, just. So downsizing has made me and my family realize that stuff is just stuff. There you are. I don't care what kind of memories are with it. It's just stuff. And you keep what you need for daily life, And then you can fit into the new place you're going.
So I have a question. I think that's a great example. Did you say your name was John?
Joe.
Joe, excuse me, Joe. Two questions for you, Joe, or for all of you. What was hard about the downsizing? And secondly, how, when you let go of stuff, do you retain what's important about that stuff, like the memories you made with it, or why that was important and therefore hard to let go of?
Well, I'll give you one really silly thing that I did not know was happening. My wife saved every single piece of schoolwork that the children did from preschool until they left the house. And I went up in the attic to get rid of stuff. And here I saw all these boxes. I had no idea what was in them. And I said, oh my gosh. It was easy for me to get rid of them, and she cried. But the memories of what the relationship with the kids and with us, yeah, some of the pictures they had and all this, yeah, that still comes up in my mind. It still exists, but not physically.
Yeah. There's a whole movement, and I'm not a minimalist. I think that's like a term of art these days, but in the minimalism movement about really kind of being ruthless about how much stuff you have, and they have this practice, or I've read in this literature about when you let go of things, doing two things at the very least. One is honoring its place in your life, honoring those memories, rejoicing in those, really thanking, I think Marie Kondo, the tidying up person, she talks about like thanking these things for the joy they sparked in your life. But then there's also the possibility, secondly, of finding a way to remember it without having to keep hold of it physically. So a lot of folks take pictures or do something to mark something that they are leaving. And pictures, I don't think they count. They don't clutter up your attic. They may fill up a hard drive, but hard drives are small and cheap, or a cloud-based sharing thing. So yeah, I'm looking through. We've done one big purge when we moved to our current home 8 years ago, and we were ruthless, perhaps a little too ruthless, because we gave away stuff we subsequently had to buy again. But but I do think there's something beautiful about thanking something for its service, letting it go, especially letting it go to someone else, not like the trash dump, obviously who's going to take your kids' schoolwork, but when you have things that could have another life with someone else, to bless those things on their way, and to find a way that the memory is retained. That's great. Anyone else?
I wonder if Holly or Amy, and then we'll come back to Mary.
True fact, Holly is from Louisville. So I know Holly from the center. Hey, Holly, glad you made it.
Yeah, I'll chime in based on what the gentleman that was speaking earlier. My example that I thought of, I was just doing some journaling with all of this, but I was thinking of an example when my daughter was suffering with, severe separation anxiety, and I was trying to get that worked through. And a therapist pointed out that I was like, even she gave her a piece of candy and I jumped right in to open the candy for her. And the therapist was kind of like, let her do it. Like and it just ties in like with your kids as a mother. I think the woman who was holding onto the schoolwork, it was such an important part of her ego. And I realized it's a part of my ego as a mother. That's the ego tied up in there. And this attraction is kind of letting go of that. And so that really resonated with me, that the ego of, as a parent, as kids get more independent, does that diminish me, or is that just your job and fulfillment? So that was interesting, letting go of that schoolwork as a mother probably was really hard. As you let your kids be independent, it kind of seems like your job's over, but it's really not.
Yeah. And isn't that excruciating? I mean, it's good, it's necessary, and man, it is painful. And it may be painful, but it's just the truth. And authentic spirituality is about the truth. So any kind of authentic spiritual path is going to have some degree of consciousness about letting go, because all of us are going to let go. We're going to have our hands pried off whatever we're holding on to at death. We know that. The question is, how do you live with a willingness to let go throughout your life so that you're best prepared for it at the end of your life? Like last year, we lost my mother-in-law. My wife's mom passed away, and she was not ready to go. She was holding on to the last, and much unresolved in her life, very complicated life and relationships with her many children, and a beautiful woman in so many ways, and also a very conflicted one to her last breath. And it was really an object lesson for us that that we want to live our lives so that we're prepared for our deaths, and we can what is it in the Catholic tradition? We say we make a good and happy death, but it's possible to make a good and happy life too, by walking through with open hands rather than clenched fists.
We
All
have
right.
one more comment here, Kyle.
Yeah.
Mary, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I've already downsized twice. That wasn't that difficult, but when my mother died, there was two things I wanted out of her house, and that was her cookbook and the crush that she had that my grandmother had passed on to her. And I told my brother, whose sons had been living in her house while my mother was living with me, I said, I want those two things out of her house. He says, oh, my wife and I already went cleaned out her house and we threw those things out. And it was then I realized that, you know what, you can't take it with you, and it really doesn't matter because there's nothing that we can take with us. So I've already started giving away some of my jewelry to my daughters that I want them to have, so there's no fighting after I'm gone. And you know, anything we have, we can't take with us, so it really doesn't matter. They're things. So
Right.
it's, yeah.
Well said. And I appreciate what you named, because I neglected to name it. And that has to do with the fact that, yes, it may be hard to let go of these things, but it can be so liberating too, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, even letting go of, certainly letting go of stuff and not feeling burdened by that, but even letting go of our kids, and letting them out into the world. Yes, it's excruciating. And yet, as I watched our oldest daughters, our twin daughters, make their own way, I'm like, I'm just rooting for them. I'm like, this is how it's supposed to happen. And it's wonderful and it's beautiful and it's painful at the same time, kind of like life. All right, so I'm going to move on. Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing that, and Holly. I'm going to move on to our third motivating factor in choosing a life of intentionality and simplicity. And that has to do with our relationship with those who are poor. I won't trouble you with all the statistics, or at least not many, but it's really important to know. Actually, I'm not even going to start with statistics. I'm going to start with a story. So when I was in graduate school at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, I was part of a small mission parish called Holy Comforter. And it was down in the inner city, and about 90% of the people who went to that church were folks who were mentally and physically disabled, living in very, very rundown, decrepit group homes. So this church was a hot mess. Oh my gosh. I drove a van for the church twice a week and picked people up from their group homes to get them to church. I even lived in the parish rectory for a while, kind of keeping an eye on the place. And I was this superstar academic, doing my work at the Ivy of the South School, Emory, this high caliber institution, thinking I was something special. And you know what? The people at Holy Comforter, my friends at Holy Comforter, did not give a darn about any of those credentials I brought to these other parts of my life. And what they taught me was something that I would go on to learn, in so many other ways, and I'm still learning, was that we are not separate creatures from each other. We are not self-sufficient. We belong to each other. We, as they say I think Thich Nhat Hanh says this, the Buddhist teacher who just died recently, we inter-are. interbeing is the nature of our reality. And you can say that in a book, or you can say that in a philosophy lecture, but that became real to me when I was living with folks and ministering with folks who lived so close to the margin of existence that they had no luxury to deny it. Because we who have our 401ks and our paid off mortgages and our own cars, and we can go to the grocery and get what we want, and we have some degree of agency in our life, we can fool ourselves into thinking that we are the masters of our own fate. We are not. And you cannot have, at least in my experience, you cannot have an authentic encounter with someone who lives on the margins and not recognize that truth. I cannot say that clearly enough, that the importance of, again, to get back to Mark's original point, if we are made by love, if we are made for love, who did God give special attention to in the scriptures? The poor. Who did Jesus pay special attention to in his ministry? The poor. Because he knew that that is where there are no pretenses left. And I don't mean this in an exploitative way, like you would visit poor people in an exhibit or something like that and have this extractive kind of transactional relationship with people who are poor. What I'm talking about is relationships that are rooted in friendship. And so it's one thing, that's why I just decided not to quote the statistics about the bottom billion and in our population, world population. You can read all those stats and hopefully be heartbroken by them. But at the end of the day, our real relationships are the ones that are rooted in love and friendship. And maybe they're aided by the structure of organizations in some ways, like a soup kitchen or even a larger scale than that. But I think it's really important for those of us who can to find some way to be in direct, ongoing relationship with people who are poor. I know it's been transformative for me in earlier years. I'll confess, I'm, again, first among hypocrites. This is less a part of my life right now because of kind of stage of life and running an organization that requires a lot of me. But I have experienced it enough to know that I'm missing out right now. And I would, and to the extent that we can simplify our lives to make room for these kinds of relationships, we're going to be the better for it. We're going to, and hopefully the folks we're in relationship with will grow as well. I want to talk a bit, just a minute, about solidarity with the poor. I'm going to finish this up pretty quickly. I see we're at the 10 minutes to go mark. I have this phrase that I can't remember where I stole it from, but I don't like people shoulding all over me. I don't, even though I try to uphold very high ethical standards from my own life, for my kids and so forth, I don't think shoulds and shoulding on people, finger pointing to people, I don't think that those are ultimately effective. In terms of embodying our relationship with the poor, in terms of embodying our choices for simplicity, let's just recognize that we are all in this room on this Zoom call. We are all the 1%. If you have a household income over $32,000, you are in the 1%. I'm in the 1%. And I think the question we need to ask ourselves in light of that is not necessarily what should we do, because willpower only brings us so far. And we'll just, how many diets fail? How many exercise plans fail, even with all kinds of good intention? What I'm going to invite you all to, in regard to relating with people who are poor and having solidarity with them, is pay attention to how that income inequality feels to you. And pay attention to how, whenever you are able to make connections, how does that feel to you? And I'm not saying it'll always feel good or bad or anything that you navigate that way, but I think God has put in our hearts a spirit of discernment such that we know what is true and what is right. I think most of us left on our own, but operating with intentionality could come up with some version of the 10 Commandments or the principles laid out in the Catechism and so forth, because it is common human sense in an important way. And we know if we really tune in, if we sink down beneath all the distractions of our lives, which simplicity enables, we can feel our connection with people who are suffering, and we can feel what is ours to do. And we can feel the heartbreak knowing that what is ours to do will never be enough, but that to not do it is to fail to be authentic and to fail to show up fully in our life. And finally, simplicity enables us to serve the poor in concrete ways. And whether that's simplifying our commitments so that we have time to volunteer at the homeless shelter, or simplifying our financial life enough so that we have enough money to support the organizations that we feel strongly about. Okay, in the time we have, I'm gonna move quickly to the last point and then hopefully preserve a few minutes for some final conversation. And I'm gonna start here. There are two really important things to know about how we live on this planet. One is that everything we have, every material good, every service that's provided, all of the energy comes ultimately from the earth. And secondly, that 90% of what we use ends up as waste and pollution. It's not recycled, it's added onto the heap. And if those two things are true, and they are true, they are unnegotiably true in this ecosystem called God's creation. If those things are true, then first of all, we need broad-scale economic change, systemic change that will bring about a different kind of economy that is in harmony with God's economy, because God's economy is circular and sustainable. Human economies, by and large, are linear, where you take something out of the earth, you do something with it, you turn it into something, and then ultimately throw it away. And there's no loop. That's that 90% part that is linear and not circular. So we need to preach societal change. We need to be living lives that foster the kind of economy and the kind of human society that is in harmony with God's great economy. And I think as individuals, recognizing that we're trapped in this system that is deeply destructive of the only home that we know we can live on, we need to disengage from that beast. We need to feed that beast less to the extent that we're able. You know the story of the two wolves, the bad wolf and the good wolf. Which one thrives? The one that you feed. And so we need to thrive, or we need to feed the things that are less destructive to this economy, knowing, especially in the first world, we can't get this fully right. We simply can't get this fully right because of just our built infrastructure, and everything implicates us in so many different ways. But again, I want to emphasize that you don't make these kind of changes. You don't simplify your life to be more ecologically sustainable simply because it's the right thing to do. If that motivation worked, we would have solved climate change by now. We would have solved soil erosion. We would have solved biodiversity loss. We haven't, because though we know the right thing to do, we cannot seem to muster sufficient willpower to do it. And that's why, even though willpower and ethical principles are crucial, and I try to live an ethically guided life, at the end of the day, behavioral change does not come from the should. It comes from, Mark, you set the tone for this so beautifully in your prayer. It comes from love. We do not try and raise good children because if we failed to do it, we're afraid that the child protective services would come after us because we broke these rules and we're going to get arrested. We raise good children because we love them. We care for the natural world to the degree, we care effectively for the natural world to the degree that we care about the world, that we love the world, that we recognize our physical connection with it because we are made of it. We're made of its dust. We recognize our spiritual connection because the spirit that dwells in the created world dwells in our hearts as well. One God made us all. So we are part and parcel physically and spiritually of this world around us. And we do it just like you cultivate a quality relationship with your spouse or your children by spending time. That's how we cultivate a strong and authentic relationship with the natural world. Again, by making intentional, conscious choices to simplify our lives to the extent that we have that time and energy. We make that time and steward our energy well so that we can spend that time and forge those connections and fuel the amazing sense of awe and wonder that's available to us because God is revealed in the natural world. In the Catholic tradition, we have a sacramental imagination. That means that the entire living world can be a sacrament. It can be revelatory. How do you think the Psalms were written? They were written by contemplating the mountains and the streams and the trees that were rooted alongside the streams. The natural world can be a place of revelation if we take the time to engage with it and to recognize our connection with it. So, okay, I've left a few minutes to share again, I think in a larger group, how, and we'll open this up broadly because I skipped over questions of solidarity and connection with the poor. I'd love to hear any experiences that you might want to share that you feel are worthy of sharing in this group context of how you were changed by an encounter with either someone who is poor or with the natural world, and how were you changed, and how did that change play out in some kind of lifestyle choice that you made differently after that encounter?
We're in deep reflection, maybe nostalgia.
Silence is golden.
Amy and Michael or Holly, you're certainly welcome to share if you'd like.
Just so you know, we're not getting out of here until someone says something.
Well, I can share an experience I had.
Ah, Mark saves the day. Go, Mark.
So in 2003, I had the real privilege to join a friend of mine to visit his family. His parents were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary down in a little town called Chirilagua in El Salvador, the Department of San Miguel. And I remember complaining to Miguel that, I'm used to having sisters and growing up in the household that I did of, I can get my own cup of coffee, that his sister didn't need to be bringing coffee in the morning to me, but I was keeping with my own ritual of going outside before people basically woke up and spending time in prayer. Inevitably, his sister would bring a cup of coffee, and she pretty quickly learned how I liked it with cream. And and I complained to him, and he said, "You know what? This is who we are. And if anything, Mark, you gotta just let these people love you."
Mm.
Right. So I took that to heart. And so the next morning, her mom and she, the Miguel's sister, were doing laundry and getting ready for the celebration, getting tablecloths washed and that. And I was sitting outside the front door watching the morning sun come up, and they were talking amongst themselves. And then she went off and came back with a small table, put a lace tablecloth over it, brought a plate of sweet bread plus the cup of coffee. And Miguel's words came back to me, and being in the midst of prayer, I also made the connection, like, and maybe that's my spiritual challenge, that I just have to let God love me the way these people are loving me now. And so it was just a profound moment of tapping into the kind of hospitality that God wants to show us, especially in the natural world, but also through others. and to be able to have that realization that that's the kind of love that God just wants, is always pouring out for us. And sometimes we just have to let God do what God does best.
Ah,
Thanks.
thank you for sharing, Mark. And I see that we're at time here, so I will close. But I so appreciate that experience because it highlights, I think, what is most important in terms of what I'm trying to communicate with you all today. And that is, well, it's the title of my book. It's Making Room. That simplicity is not something that it's not like a lifestyle that you chisel out by will and effort, and therefore you have bragging rights about how little stuff you own or how little money you can live on and so forth. I mean, those things may happen, but if they happen as side effects, because the main point in living a simpler life, in your choices around food and money and how you steward your time and how you buy things and get rid of things and everything, the main point is to carve out enough space where you have freedom to receive the love that God promises for all of us, and freedom to share that love in all of your relationships with those close to you, others, further from the center of your circles, all the way to the created world itself. So that's what I wish for you all, that as we near the end of this Lenten season, that this, to the extent it hasn't yet, if it hasn't yet, there's still time between now and Easter to make room through various ways of letting go and being intentional about how we steward our time and our energy and our resources. And in that room, in that space that we manage to create through our intentional choices and our prayer life, that is where love can happen. That is where God can invite us into a deeper and more full way of belonging. So thank you all for your time and attention today. Many prayers and blessings to you as you continue your Lenten journey, and may you all have a blessed Easter.
Yeah, Kyle, thanks. Thanks for joining us. Thank you also to our Encore program team who help plan these various events that we hold on a monthly basis. We certainly, Kyle, wish you and your family all the best as you continue in your ministry, and thank you for sharing. And I would say you did share some wisdom with us today. So we'll give you some props in that argument as well. Just a couple of, one, also thank Holly and Amy and Michael for joining us today. We're just so glad that this kind of technology allows people to have a connection that we can have across the virtual world to help foster community. We do have some upcoming events. These are all posted on our website. For our next Encore, Father Bill Edens will be joining us on May 17th and talking about how we develop faith over our lifetime and the different stages of faith that we experience, and maybe offer some insight on where we're at now in our second half of life, third of life. And then in June, Sister Mary Kay Osdike will be joining us to talk about the Eucharist. The U.S. bishops are starting a national Eucharistic revival, which will culminate in the National Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis. And that starts on June 19th this year, and Sister Mary Kay Osdike will be joining us, I believe, on June 9th, talking about Eucharist as a mystery to be believed. And then also, relating back to the natural world, in our Kenny Faith and Life series on April 19th, Anna Robertson of the Catholic Climate Covenant will be joining us to talk about rhythms of nature and rhythms of faith, how the Paschal mystery shows up in the natural world and how we can make connections with our Catholic faith and how we relate to God's creation. And on that note, the Catholic Climate Covenant is one of several organizations that is part of a campaign for climate solutions, which will be happening May 2nd that week, in which people are invited to contact their senators and encounter their senators and talk about the need for addressing climate change and how we can care for the earth, inspired by the words of Pope Francis in Laudato Si. And there's plenty of preparation materials, and you can find that all online at Campaign for Climate Solutions and the Campaign for the Catholic Climate Covenant. And I'll send the link out as a follow-up. I know, Kyle, you're part of the Catholic Climate Covenant as an ambassador.
Yep,
I
they
don't
do
know
great
if you have
work.
anything to
Fantastic
add
work.
to that announcement, but we're.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
No, I
if
mean,
you have anything you want to add to that?
well, only that, I mean, just more generally, the Covenant does such phenomenal work. And I would encourage you to go to the Covenant's website, and because there's a ton of resources there to help parishes and dioceses fully engage with Laudato Si, which is, I think, one of the most powerful encyclicals of our lifetime, powerful and far-reaching. And unfortunately, one of the best kept secrets at the parish level. So, so I'm certainly devoted to helping get that word out about Pope Francis's directives in the encyclical, and the Covenant is just a gold mine of information. And Dan Misla, longtime friend of mine who founded the Covenant, is just he and Jose are doing marvelous work.
Kyle, thanks once again. And thank all of you, and this ends our meeting. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Thank you too. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.